Hey. 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 Yo. I said it's the TBL show with Siri and Nick. If you hating on us now, wait until we get rich. Hey. Okay, guys.
Oh, I think I dislodged 3 of my vertebra.
Funny little intro there, but I don't know if you can tell. I'm super excited, guys. This is the revamped, brand new, improved, better than ever, go tell your sister, Body Lock Podcast, episode number 36. I'm your host, Nicholas Vera, with my co-host, Siri Karri. Siri, how are you doing today?
I'm doing real well. In my comfy Korean zombie sweatshirt. Try to get that on the frame. There we go. And ready to talk some MMA, man.
And he's fighting soon, so that's topical. So real quick, guys, I just want to explain a little bit of our hiatus. We haven't really had a podcast since August, and we haven't been consistent since like midsummer. Just a lot of technical issues. Jake has been moving here and there. You know, he's just jumping from hostel to hostel, saving the children, fighting world hunger, and just doing what he does. And we've been over here lazy and unemployed. No, I'm just kidding. It's just been a transition period here at TBL. We've gotten a lot of new writers, a lot of new talent, and I'm really excited for that. Just with all the stuff that's been going on, it's just been hard to kind of keep up, but we're back. We're ready to go. This week we only have 2 of us, but next week we're going to have Tom Tierney, one of our writers, on, and that's going to be a really fun podcast. And then from then on, we want to be having guests on a weekly basis at least. And okay, let me just stop with the pleasantries. Let's just get right into the topics. The first one I want to start on here is Demetrious Johnson, Ben Askren. And I'm not going to lie. At first, when this news came out, I was really not happy with the trade. I was kind of like just upset, and it just didn't really make sense to me. I felt like Demetrious Johnson is, he's on the Mount Rushmore of UFC athletes, and it would just make no sense to make that kind of trade. And as the couple of days went on, and I hear Demetrious Johnson's side of the story and Ben Askren's side of the story, it starts to make sense, not just from a fighter perspective, but from a promotion perspective. I think overall, like, there's a lot of positivities on both sides, and not just short term, but long term as well. Real quick, Siri, I wanted to frame this for you. If you could rate this move 0 out of 10 for the UFC and for 1, what would you give it and why?
Oh, man. See, that depends what the UFC does with it. And I know what they may do, what they won't do, and that concerns me. Okay, so Demetrious Johnson, I thought they could have made a lot of money with the rematch against Cejudo.
Mm-hmm.
So they're leaving some pay-per-view buys on the table. Granted, not the most, but still. On the other hand, DJ has cleared out so much of the division, in his reign of dominance, that after Cejudo, there really would be no one left. So why not ship him off to ONE FC? And you know what? I know people don't really like wrestlers, but Askren may be the best welterweight wrestler in the world. And that's considering Tyron Woodley. So he's been talking a lot of smack about it. You ship away a guy who I think you've made as much money from as you can, and then you bring in the next guy and be like, oh, a new challenger, because Darren Till couldn't do it. So there's potential here. I would say it could be a 9, but with the UFC at the helm, let's give it a 7.
Right. I think for 1 championship, this is a 10 out of 10 move for sure. They got Demetrious Johnson pretty much at the height of his powers. I really like what they're doing with their divisions there. Demetrious Johnson was talking about he's going to fight at 135, completely natural. He weighs 138 just walking around. And I think that's just going to be...
He's that light walking around?
Yeah, exactly. He was a born... or not born feather flyweight, but it really worked out for him having that division, but getting the move on up and everyone having to be hydrated. I think we're going to see a whole new Demetrious in this era of 1 championship. And not just that, I think they're combining this move with Eddie Alvarez, They're signing a new North American deal so they can have their fan base watch the fight, because now that you're importing these fighters, you have to have the fan base to follow them. And I think that's what's going to happen here. And one of the more contentious points that Malki Kawa made on the MMA Hour earlier this week was that, weirdly enough, Demetrius Johnson's stock rose after he lost to Henry Cejudo, and I could definitely argue against that, the night of the fight. But as time has gone on, his stock has literally risen to the point where, he's going to be asking, Eddie Alvarez numbers, if not more, with this new promotion. On the UFC side, I'd have to say it's an 7 to 8 out of 10. Ben Askren is a little bit on, he's 34, he's getting up there in age, and the welterweight division is completely stacked, and it's not. I don't, I know he's great, but I also know that he's not just going to come in there and demolish everyone. In the way that he's been hyping it up to be. He's best friends with Tyron Woodley, so a title fight is completely out of the picture between the two. So there's some areas where Ben Askren.
You don't think that fight would ever happen?
No, I don't think so. I heard Ben Askren on the MMA Hour, and he was saying Tyron Woodley would move up to middleweight before I fight for the belt. So it seems like, I don't know. I mean, I guess if they both get an offer that they can't refuse, that would be up on the table. But
well, look at it this way. Look at how long Cain Velasquez kept Daniel Cormier out of the heavyweight division, and now he's there holding the belt. Is Cain just never gonna fight again?
Yeah, I mean, if Tyron Woodley just randomly tears his ACL, then we'll see that happen. But some fighters say, "Oh, I'll never fight my teammate," and then they do, and some fighters say that and then they mean it. It sounded like Ben Askren means it. What I'm saying is that there's just a little bit more limitations on what Ben Askren can do just overall on his title reign. I'd love to see the Darren Till fight. I'd love to see the Colby Covington fight. I'd love to get a super match with Khabib and or GSP. I think those 4 fights right there already, you have a contract lined up, an idea, a route, if you will, of what this guy could do. Funkmaster's finally in the UFC. I'm excited to get him in there. If you had to give one opponent right now out of the 4 I just mentioned, who would you like to see most?
Oh, man. Khabib. Because I don't, like you said, Woodley is very unlikely. Covington, I think the result is pretty much a given. And if Covington somehow manages to beat Askren, that'll just be proof that Askren is old, not that Covington is an elite fighter. Right. So Khabib has already had trouble cutting weight. He made it for his title shot, but he's always struggled with it. Yeah. So maybe take him up to 170. Askren is an athlete, but he's not big. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So maybe we get to see who is the best wrestler in the UFC. Now, that's not going to sell any pay-per-views, but that's the fight I want to see.
Right, yeah, and I think you make a good point there, too, because he's definitely not the most physically impressive fighter, just visually, but you can just tell he has weird muscle dexterity all throughout. I mean, you would have to naturally be that way if you're wrestling all your life at such a high level and at such a high clip. Mm-hmm. He runs one of the best academies in the entire United States. And, a lot of unperceived strength comes with that, and I'm really excited for him to get in there. Period. He made a remark that he considered Colby Covington a B version or even C version of himself, and if they ever got in the ring, that would be a really fun barometer to see where Colby Covington is on, because Colby's never really wowed me in terms of his technical ability with some of his wrestling moves, but he definitely has the conditioning and the heart to eke out results like that, and that'd be crazy if he would be able to do that against the Funkmaster. And just Ben Askren losing in general would be huge, in any of the fights that he takes in the UFC. I think, he's one of those weird fighters where even though he's never been in the UFC, he's always carried this aura of, I'm unbeatable, I have the funk, there's something different about me, and not everyone is gonna...
Bellator always lags behind the UFC in terms of star power. That's a given. Every organization really does. Mm-hmm. But if there's any star power in Bellator, it's between featherweight, lightweight, and welterweight. And what he fought Andrei Korshkov, and Korshkov is a highlight reel knockout artist.
Right.
So he at least could build his brand. Now, if you're the UFC, do you want Askren to do well when he comes over? Or do you want him to struggle almost as proof that the best talent in the world is in the UFC? Like the UFC has a monopoly on that.
Oh, that's a tough question. Again, I'm not hoping that he loses, but it would be interesting because it definitely does say a lot. I'd say out of I'm gonna keep Tyron Woodley out of this equation for right now, but I'd say out of GSP, Khabib, Colby, Darren Till, he only loses to Khabib. I think if if any of those fights come to fruition, I think he beats everybody else. Maybe GSP not like handedly, not like serves his ass to him, but it would be somewhere close where he can finally make a contention to being one of the best welterweights of all time.
Yeah, I can see that.
So real quick, let's jump into, before we get into the preview of UFC 230. I want to do a quick recap of UFC Moncton. This is the card, obviously, where Anthony Smith won the headliner against Volkan Ozdemir. Also, Lobov had his fight against Michael Johnson. And Misha Serkinov also did really well amongst some other fighters. Andrei Sukumta as well, he picked up a decision victory. Real quick, what did you think of Anthony Smith in this main event? Because after the first round, I thought Volkan was really close to finishing him, and I've been skeptical. I've been really skeptical of Anthony Smith lately because his last loss was to Thiago Santos, and he got decimated in that fight. I mean, Thiago Santos in his fights since then hasn't been, the starcher that we thought he could be at middleweight. And Anthony Smith went to light heavyweight and beat a bunch of veterans, beat a bunch of guys that have already been beaten and kind of at the tail end of their career. And all of a sudden he's looking uber impressive. And I think this fight against Ozdemir was like the first real test that he would get in this division, and he didn't pass with flying colors, but he passed that initial bump of adversity that he hadn't gone through in the past. And I thought that said a lot to me. He was talking about fighting Jones or possibly competing with DC or Gustafsson after the fact. I don't think he's 100% there yet, but just that initial overcoming the odds against a hitter like Volkan Ozdemir, it definitely proved a lot to me.
So we just published an article on this. And I agree. I think Ozdemir was the first real test that he faced. Because his previous ones at light heavyweight was just Anthony Smith going into a nursing home and like finding anyone that used to wear a belt and beating the snot out of them. This one, it's really a question as to what is a elite light heavyweight anymore. Because we had, say, Tito Ortiz, Chuck Liddell, Randy Couture, maybe you want to put Bubbaloo in there, some semblance of depth and star power. That gave way to Rashad Evans, Forrest Griffin, Quentin Jackson, Shogun Hua, Lyoto Machida, and then John Jones. And then John Jones stayed there. And everything else crumbled below him. There's Gustafsson, Johnson, and Cormier. Cormier's at heavyweight now. Johnson has retired to get into the legal marijuana business. And Gustafsson's getting his rematch. But honestly, with all due respect to the fighters in that division, there's John Jones, there's a reasonable gap, then there's Alexander Gustafsson, and then there is a gaping chasm, and then there is Volkan Ozdemir. That's how it looks now. So when Anthony Smith called for the winner of Gustafsson and Jones, he has the right to do it. But he beat the third best in the division, and the first two are fighting for the title. So there's nothing left for him to do. But like, how good could he possibly be? He's a good athlete. He's got easy knockout power, and he showed grit, but I don't know, man. I think it might get real ugly if he steps in.
Yeah, and that's what I mentioned before. I think it's really weird how topsy-turvy the light heavyweight division is. I think if they're gonna do more Ultimate Fighters in the future with this ESPN deal, I'd like to see them, add depth to light heavyweight because again, there's still a lot of guys. We have your David Branches and your Jared Cannoniers and Ilir Latifis and stuff like that. But again, the difference between the rank number 1 fighter and rank number 5, like you said, it's a chasm, and it's not something that can be overcome with like a year of training, and in that process you're going to be taking fights and taking damage. So it's really tough to say like what's the most optimal route, for a guy like Anthony Smith, because like we've mentioned before, there's levels, and to just throw him into a fight with John Jones immediately after the war he's gonna have with Gustafsson, it wouldn't be.
I like that. That's a foregone conclusion that Jones is gonna win that. I mean, I think he will too, but I like
Right.
that we don't. It's not even a possibility
It's
that
a
Gus
toss-up.
takes the rematch.
It's a toss up, and
No,
we'll
no,
get to
no.
that
You
later.
revealed your true colors. It's recorded. It's the evidence is there.
Well, I don't know. I'm just saying, like, if we're gonna go with the trend, which is John Jones beats everybody,
Solid
he doesn't
trend
get this
observed
fight.
over a long period of time.
Right. Then you could assume that. But either way, and I'm not taking anything away from Gustafsson, but like we said, this is a division that it's very increasingly top heavy, more so than any other division. And for a guy like Anthony Smith, I just think he needs more time and experience to like really, and not to say that he can't do it. It's just gonna take some time. Real quick, I wanted to talk about Artem Lobov. There was a lot of conversation about him. First
And
off,
why he still has a job.
first off, plaudits to him. Honestly, like, I think this should be the initiative for the future, where if within 2 weeks of a fight, someone drops out and the other and a third party picks up the fight on short notice and doesn't make weight by the amount that Michael, I can't remember how much he missed by, but it wasn't egregious or anything like that.
I think it was like 2 or 3 pounds.
Yeah. So Artem Lobov just showed a great sense of initiative, something like a kinship for the guy that's across from you in the cage that I haven't seen in a while in the UFC, and it was quite refreshing. I think SBG needs all the positive press they can get, and Artem Lobov specifically, because I think we kind of forget that this whole Khabib Conor thing started because of Artem Lobov. I mean, it was Khabib, giving Artem Lobov the Godfather concession, like he's like, hey, listen, Artem, you're playing for the wrong side. And then all of a sudden, the Dolly incident and the fight and the brawl that ensued afterwards, I mean, it's all come full circle now. And I don't know, as much as people hate Artem Lobov and there's like the mythology that follows his ever clear 14-14 record, he does have
he's at 500. I thought he dipped below.
Oh no, I think he just dipped below, but you know what I'm saying, that was like the joke beforehand. Like, there's all these memes that follow him, but this, and he is 2-5 in the UFC, but look, this is a guy that's been in the cage 5 rounds with Cub Swanson. He definitely got beat by Michael Johnson, but it was still competitive. I think there's still a place for him. I mean, if CM Punk hasn't been officially cut from the roster yet, I think we can take a couple months on Artem Lobov. He's just been, I wouldn't even say fun to watch, because some of his fights are, in fact, boring. I think there's a little bit of like a nerve issue that comes with him, like, when he's in the cage, that just kind of like he just locks up differently. But I honestly don't hate him, and I think there is a place for fighters of his caliber, and fighters where he is kind of in the UFC by affiliation, but so are some of Khabib's guys. So are some of the people that are in Jackson Wink that maybe they're not on that level, but with the right camp, which they're at, they can get to that level. They kind of supersede the climb. Same thing with Team Alpha Male and other notorious camps. I think there is a place for him, especially when they start doing these ESPN cards. It feels like there's going to be a UFC A for the pay-per-views, and there's going to be a UFC B. And I think he definitely toes that line where, again, he shouldn't get co-main event spots. He shouldn't get, opening fight of the pay-per-view or anything like that. But there is a place for him, and I think there's a place for multiple fighters like that in the UFC. And I don't know. I just would appreciate if the fans were a little less harsh, because getting cut after a loss is so devastating to a fighter, and I don't wish that on anyone. Regardless of their situation or their social status or anything like that. I don't know. Don't agree with it.
I got nothing to add. I'm indifferent to Lobov. I don't enjoy his pain, but I wish he wasn't in the UFC.
Right.
So that is. my
And
concise point.
last quick topic on UFC Moncton, Misha Serkinov. What'd you think of that fight?
It was nice to see Serkinov win,
Right, exactly. That's the
and
point. And
maybe
against
because I'm a cynic.
mhm.
But does this say more about Serkinov or does it say more about Pat Cummins?
I think it says, ooh, that's a tough one because I thought, physically speaking, I thought this was like the best version of Pat Cummins that we've seen in a while. You know, because he got those wins early on, I think against Little Nog that kind of put him on the map, and then he lost a couple fights after that, and he, has been kind of like a up and down kind of fighter, and Serkinov coming off, I think he was off 2 losses and comes back and gets this fight. Pat Cummins looked impressive, and it was kind of like, when the unstoppable force meets the immovable object, and the unstoppable force just pummels him over and puts him in an arm triangle choke. It was crazy to see how little Pat Cummins had to, like, how little agency he was able to express in that fight. I just thought it was like, even though they were in a clinch for most of the time, the posture, the striking, the control was all for Serkinov the entire time, and the second he got to the mat, he took him out. And I thought that was very impressive, very surgical. And
Yeah, Cummins might not be the best fighter, but at the very least, he's a grinding, intense wrestler for as long as his body allows him to.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's his limitation too. That's why there's kind of a ceiling on what he can achieve.
Right.
But going to the ground and taking him out, yeah, I'll give props for that. Especially, I think it was inside 2 minutes, right?
It was 2 minutes 40 seconds, which is still great because Pat Cummins is not a one round and out kind of fighter. So that was, again, just impressive and a good return to the win column for Misha Serkinov. But that's enough for UFC Moncton. I want to get into UFC 230 because there are at least 4 fights that we can go an hour on just talking about the dynamics and all that. But first things first, let's start with the main event. Daniel DC Cormier versus miso ball soup Derek Lewis. I think this is gonna be one hell of a fight. I don't. Obviously, I think Cormier is gonna win. But Derek Lewis does have a puncher's chance, but I just think the turnaround was a little too quick. Like if this was 231, I would say okay, Lewis can kind of figure out a game plan or something like that. But I feel like the UFC hopped on a wave with the matchmaking for this fight, and it's not a bad idea, but it's like, there were so many factors that were stopping Stipe Miocic and Daniel Cormier from rematching, and then the second Derek Lewis hit 1 million followers, it was like, no, this is the fight. And it's kind of crazy. Like I really do feel like they're making matches based off follower counts and not really who deserves a rematch, because I did think Stipe Miocic deserved that, even though he did get starched in the first round. I don't know. What's your take on this fight?
Yeah, the turnaround is interesting. I'm not so concerned about the way he was getting pieced up by Volkov. That's nicks and bruises. I don't think it's going to affect him. But they were alluding to it even during the fight that Lewis has a lingering back injury that's kept him from performing at its fullest. And it looks like it's gotten somewhat better. But such a quick turnaround after a grueling fight against Daniel Cormier, I'm concerned as to how well he thinks that's going to go. Especially when he's going to have to fight him in the clinch and everything. And also, he has a puncher's chance. Bring to the table that Anthony Rumble Johnson did not do better. Obviously, Lewis has the weight. He's a heavyweight. But what Rumble also has those wide swings. He can come in at angles, good uppercut, always the puncher's chance. And Cormier worked him over twice. The second time, Rumble decided to wrestle with him. That's his, I don't know what happened there. But I don't know. I don't think this is going to be a close fight or even a spirited fight. The only way it will be is if Cormier decides he wants to box him. But if he picks him up and just throws him down and grinds him out, it should take him less time than it took against Volkan Ozdemir.
Right, yeah, and I'm in a similar boat. I just think it's gonna go similar to the Anthony Rumble Johnson situation, where if you don't put him out of his misery, Derek Lewis to DC like quickly, it's just going to be one of those things where DC's just going to run over you the second he gets a chance to put him on the ground, and that's where DC really shines. It's his imposition of strength when he's able to get on top of you and just the way he rear naked choked Anthony Rumble Johnson on both of those occasions. That was I'm looking for a way out kind of submission. It wasn't just he out grappled him and then really quick jumped around for underhooks and got him. That was just like, here, take my back, I'm out of here. and I think it's gonna go in similar fashion.
I mean, I don't know if Lewis will quit, but yeah, I think he'll get finished.
Right. But let's now the next fight. Let's jump into
that does leave us with the match between the. I'm assuming that this is the middleweight #1 contender fight. Weidman against Jacare.
One would think so. I honestly, I don't know. Yeah, because there's also Luke Rockhold just floating in the midst, But
I thought Rockhold was moving up to 205, or was that just talk?
No, because this was the fight that was scheduled to be Rockhold and Weidman, and then something happened initially. I'm not sure. No, it was the injury, right? It was something with his knee, and that's how Weidman Jacare got mixed, put into place.
Which is a fight I really wanted to see, but like 3 or 4 years ago.
Right. Exactly. I think this fight's a little bit out of place. If they were both on a full camp, I'd be more leaning towards Jacare. But I think Weidman has had plenty of time to rehabilitate himself, just get back into fighting shape, not just physically but also mentally, because I think he kind of hit a block in terms of his ability in the cage. I felt like upwards pretty much through the Vitor Belfort fight, he was just constantly renovating his game, finding new things to make him better and excelling in those things. And then after the Rockhold loss, he kind of hit a stump where the creativity wasn't there. Just he was so good at being consistently making the right moves, and that just hasn't happened the same exact way since that loss. I hope this fight against Jacare, because you definitely have to be technically proficient on all rounds, because yes, Jacare is a great jiu-jitsu practitioner, but he's also not afraid to stand and bang. He has a crazy right hand, and you have to make him pay on all fronts in order to get the victory over him, and this will be the kind of victory that says, okay, Chris Weidman is back, it's official. But he definitely needs to win in an impressive fashion.
Yeah, I mean, if you saw Jacare against Gastelum, Jacare hung in there till the end.
Mm-hmm.
But you could tell, first off, now that Whitaker doesn't need to cut weight, his chin has gotten way better.
Yeah.
And even though, no, I'm sorry, what am I talking about?
Not Whitaker.
Not Whitaker, Gastelum.
Yeah.
Which Gastelum already had a good chin at welterweight. It's just he couldn't stop eating. But he stuck in there and was just swinging, and I'm proud of that. But it was clear that Jacare's two-threat combination of a huge right hand and powerful wrestling and submission. Jacare, for the longest time, there are certain fighters that are good at taking their opponents down, and there are certain fighters that are good at submitting them when they are down. Like, Nate Diaz can submit anyone on the ground, but he has no wrestling to speak of. Jacare was one of the few people who could tear fighters to the ground and then submit them easily. And against Gastelum, it looks like he's slowed down. It's not enough to carry him anymore. And if the championship caliber Chris Weidman shows up, then I think it should be easy work. Unless Jacare can actually knock him out. If he can get him out in the first round and a half, 2 rounds, okay. If it goes past that, because it's a co-main, are they getting 5 or is this only 3?
It's 3.
It's 3. Okay, Jacare might have a shot. He'll have to win the first 1.5 rounds convincingly, and then just play safe because Weidman will start coming after him.
Right, and I think the
So
trick here is to make Chris Weidman hesitant on the takedowns. I think Yo Romero did it perfectly with that knee that put him to sleep when they fought back in MSG, which coincidentally that's where they're fighting again. Um, you have to make having that kind of timing and making a guy hesitate on their most important tool, which is Chris Weidman's wrestling, that changes the fight. And again, that's what stifles the creativity. It stifles the game plan. It makes you think, and when you're thinking, you're not fighting, and boom, that's where the openings come from. But it's gonna take something special for sure from Jacare. I just hope he has, that knee that he's been working on, or the elbow coming in that can frustrate Chris Weidman enough to take him off of his game plan, because he is coming in a little bit with the odds stacked against him with the limited camp and all that. But either way, it's going to be a great fight. There's no doubt about that. And real quick, just to stay in the middleweight division, we talk about contenders within the game. Derek Brunson and Israel Adesanya are ranked fighters that are not in the same category as Chris Weidman and Jacare in terms of contending for the title, but within a few years and or fights, they could be. How do you see this fight going down, and where do you think? Because personally, I have Adesanya coming into this one, but I do see scenarios where Brunson can, make him pay.
I bet against Adesanya last time, and you guys told me to go for him. Because I wasn't educated as much as you guys on him, and it turned out you guys were right.
Mm-hmm.
So I have the explosive, young, dynamic guy, and that doesn't mean Brunson doesn't have crazy power, but it's not like stuff you see in Tekken.
Right.
It's very simple power boxing. Not to say it isn't effective. So eventually, young and dynamic beats veteran and savvy. And I suppose I could see this being one of those cases.
Yeah, and I'm in the same boat. I think Brunson has kind of been, he's definitely been impressive, and he made serious strides in his striking. But I think, people are still sleeping on the magnitude of fights, and like Israel Adesanya. People forget that Adesanya, he's I think 28, 29. He's had a whole entire career in kickboxing, like from beginning to end, arcs, ups and downs, all that before even stepping into an MMA cage, in his first pro fight. And that weight of experience, even though it's not the same sport, it's baseball, cricket kind of thing. It's in the same field, and I think it's so great that Adesanya can show that proficiency in his striking, because it really is, in a similar vein to Stephen Thompson, light years ahead of his competition. And Brunson, I think, specifically has, he's not quick enough to expose, anything that Israel Adesanya can do. He's very technical. He knows how to look for the strike and not force the strike that'll end the fight. He's really good at peppering in punches that maybe they're not. The one punch by itself isn't lethal, but the combination is, and that is the kind of stuff that Adesanya is going to bring to the table that can make Brunson mess up. And I've seen it before with Brunson, where if he gets stunned at all or gets in a situation where he sees red, and he's gonna go lunge forward, he's gonna leave his chin up there, and problems are gonna arise. So I don't know. The more I break this fight down, the more I see Adesanya just imposing his control. I think he's, striking just completely on the side. I think his takedown defense has improved immensely. It's almost similar to how Joanna kind of, showed her strides in wrestling through her takedown defense. She never imposed her wrestling to show that she could do it, but the way that she kept herself on the mat against different fighters, namely Jessica Andrade, was like, wow, you can tell she's really been putting in the time, and in a similar vein that Adesanya does his work. So I just think the sky's the limit for him. Again, he's not even a kid. He's new to the sport, but he's not new to the game, and I think that's what's so special about him. And he's gonna go far for sure.
Anything else? Anyone else a note we got to cover for 230?
Um, there was one more fight: David Branch versus Jared Cannonier. This was the fight that would have been David Branch and Jacare. Um, and then obviously, one guy had to move up to make the move, and Jared Cannonier came up to make the call. And if I'm not, I don't know if they're fighting at middleweight or light heavyweight. I can't remember, but I think this is going to be a great matchup too, because David Branch is one of those guys. Again, he is good enough to be on the ranking board, but maybe he's still a step or two off the top 5, top 6. And this is the exact kind of matchup where it's like, okay, beat 2 or 3 more guys at the level of Jared Cannonier, and maybe you get to that point. But also, Jared Cannonier has the ability to make an upset. So just as a fight by itself, it's super amazing. David Branch is also a New York native, so fighting in front of his, what would be his home crowd is also a great opportunity, a huge opportunity for any fighter. I think there's so many fights. I love the initiative that the UFC has taken to making New York fights about New York with New York fighters. I think it's something that you have to do in any fan base. If you go to Cleveland, you got to get the Cleveland fighters on there. You go to Singapore, you got to get the Singaporean fighters on there. Whichever way, to maximize that like home initiative from the fan base, it's gonna make more people come out, and it's gonna make the atmosphere of the night even better. And
It's interesting how many talented fighters New York has produced, despite the fact that MMA was essentially banned for until very recently there. So yeah, it's a nice homecoming of sort. I do want to say this. When talking about the level Dave Branch is at, he's only lost 1 fight in his past 11 or 12, and that was to Rockhold. And it happened exactly the way we called it, but he was boxing up Rockhold. So I don't know. I don't know if he has to prove himself, because he was thrown in against Rockhold, and Rockhold up until recently, I thought he was the best middleweight in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Up until Whitaker proved he's made out of steel, and Rockhold proved that he doesn't know how to block a left hand.
Right. Yeah, that was definitely one of those fights that he kind of. It's almost like a false start, just with the way that ended up panning out, and but yeah, I just think the middleweight division is weirdly, because 2 years ago I would have put it like the light version of light heavyweight, in the sense that it's very top heavy. The best guys are also super old, so in a couple of years you could see a decay, and then out of nowhere Robert Whitaker, and that's the kind of guy. And Derek Brunson is in that same class. Adesanya is in that same class in terms of up and comers. There's a lot of life that has been breathed into this division that has been making it interesting to watch, namely with the champion, but also with a lot of fighters that are on this card. Let me see.
And it kind of came out of, well, I wouldn't say nowhere, but for the longest time I had Weidman on top, because Weidman carved a swath of destruction. His title reign is actually very impressive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I said there's a 3-headed monster that to describe the challenges that awaited him, and that was Jacare Souza, Luke Rockhold, and Yoel Romero. And I thought in terms of relative strength, it went Rockhold, Jacare, Romero. Now that's not even close. It's something like Whitaker at top, Romero, maybe Gastelum even, and then a bunch of young guys, and that are actually really good. So I'm pleased, man. We'll see how deep this renaissance goes.
Yeah, it's great for the UFC, and in the blossoming of the middleweight division, there's also the kind of light exodus that we've seen of flyweight so far. I didn't get a chance to see Henry Cejudo's interview on JRE, but I'm sure he's had plenty of thoughts on what Demetrius Johnson's departure means for the division. Bottom line is they still do have a champion, but they lost one of their figureheads in an already not so popular division. What do you think can be done about flyweight just as a whole to kind of just reinvigorate some life? I mean, is it going to take because I think Cejudo did a great thing by slaying the dragon in a sense, and beating him. It was a close fight, but for sure I thought Henry did enough to eke out 3 rounds, and they could have ran it they should have ran it back, but I think Cejudo has the possibility to make himself a household name if he goes on and fights TJ, because I think anybody who beats TJ right now is Hall of Fame material, because he is truly like breaking boundaries, excelling past any kind of barometer to like how
And
good you thought he could have been. He's surpassing that with every fight. And Demetrius
if
Johnson was
if
one of
the
those
fight
guys.
with Dominic Cruz was 6 rounds instead of 5, TJ would have kept his belt.
Yeah.
Unquestionably.
Uh-huh.
And I think he beat him in a rematch. And the thing is, the removal of Demetrius Johnson all of a sudden turns a bunch of people into viable contenders. Because there are a lot of people that might have lost once, twice to Demetrius Johnson that now they're talented fighters. They might put on a show with Cejudo. You know what I mean? It's not going to be a beatdown. And you can put them all in there again. I mean, Serge Pettis is struggling, obviously, but now you could see him maybe fighting Cejudo, whereas you wouldn't even make that case against Mighty Mouse. And then there's all his contenders. Maybe Ray Borg goes back in there.
Right, exactly. I think Ray Borg is a key guy where, he went close to 5 rounds with Demetrius Johnson. For sure he got a rub off of being in the cage with one of the best of all time. And there's so much more development because he was 25 when he had that fight. That's Cody Garbrandt.
Yeah, I forgot how young he was.
There's so much upside to this division, not just in Sergio Pettis, with a lot of guys down the line. And to give up on the division would be a shame. But I also I understand it from a fiscal standpoint, because it definitely hasn't been the highest selling division. But you could argue the same for women's featherweight, women's flyweight. There's so many holes within the UFC to just give up on a division that has an established champion, that has 10 plus defenses already within its own division in such a short time. That's crazy talk, and I don't think that's happening, because Malky Kawa was relaying that Dana White didn't want to give up DJ in the first place, so that kind of calms the rumors for me that maybe he might be. I think there's going to be a renovation of sorts with certain divisions, and I think the most prevalent theme within the UFC from a fighter's perspective is the starting of a 165 division. I think they have to separate 170 into 2 divisions and let the lightweight fighters come up. And once you make those 10-pound increments for those 3 specific weights, it's going to be so huge, because at that point, Ben Askren can fight for 2 belts, Conor McGregor can fight for 2 belts, Khabib, and so on and so forth. I think there's so much more options when you do that kind of move, and I think enough fighters are vying for it that it could be a thing in the future.
I guess, but 165 is a really weird weight, because on the one hand, it's 10 pounds up from lightweight, which I get, because that's a significant difference. But it's only 5 pounds below welterweight. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I totally get it. Like, you'd have to make a janky weight division. You'd have to make like 162 or something, which I'm totally down for, because welterweight, there are so many welterweights that are slightly on the small side, but great fighters. And there are lightweight who struggle cutting weight. Like, I think Nate Diaz would do great in a 162 division. You know what I mean? Because, I mean, he's still cutting a lot of weight, but it's not destructive like the lightweight cut is.
Yeah. And you're going to say that for a lot of fighters. I mean, Conor McGregor didn't look, absolutely amazing when he was on the scale for the Khabib fight, and same thing with Khabib. There are even talks about him having seizures the night before the fight because of.
Yep, he's had trouble getting blood to his liver, I think, last time he missed his weight cut.
Yeah, and those are all signs that times are changing, and it's such a thing of, fighters want to have the maximum advantage. So you have 170, people that walk around at 170 fighting at 145, people that fight at 185, they're cutting down to 170, or they walk around at 185 and they're doing the, and so on and so forth. There's so many large gaps in the risk that they take, and depending on the week that you had, leading up to a fight, you take a fight on short notice and you have to, fly out a nutritionist to do some, intense things where you're eating 3 almonds a day. Like, I don't want to incite that kind of stuff. And I think that's really, coming back to one championship, that's where they're showing an initiative that Ben Askren spoke highly of. Demetrius Johnson as well spoke really highly of. He's going to be fighting at 135, DJ, because he needs to, be hydrated. So I think that's something the UFC could enact. It would just go hand in hand with the USADA stuff and all that. It would just make it easier, and I think we'd see a lot less pulling out of fights because people would just be ready to fight at the weight they're supposed to fight regularly. So,
That's
filling
fair,
in
yeah.
is easier. I think there's a lot of upside to that we just haven't explored, because, these are the structures that we've had in place, but, it's time to renovate. I don't know. Did you want to really quick muse on John Jones or Gustafsson, or do you want to save that for a future episode?
I think we might as well just save that for when they're actually about to fight.
For sure. All right, well...
Because with Gus's injury record, the conversation we have may end up being moot. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Let's save our breath for that one. All right, I guess that's going to do it for us. It's been super fun to get back. Next week we'll probably begin with Tom Tierney, depending on the time of that we set it up. We did this podcast on a Tuesday, or we recorded it on a Tuesday, but we will be releasing episodes, recording them Sunday, releasing them on Monday. So just a heads
Nick, it's not Tuesday.
Huh?
It's not Tuesday.
Oh, it's Wednesday, right? Because we were.
My first instinct was like, I thought I just lost days because that's what happens when you work from home and don't leave unless you need to. Everything melts together.
Yeah.
And I was like,
We're only getting an hour back. I was thinking a day. But no. Yeah. So that's the plan for the future. The schedule is going to be record Sunday nights, release Monday, and that's just how we're going to try to do it. On a regular basis, weekly, and with guests. Again, this has been episode number 36 of the Body Lock Podcast. I'm Nick. This is Siri. Thanks so much for watching, and see you next time.